Our next speaker joins us virtually from overseas. Dr. Clare is the director at Risk Resolve and brings extensive experience in outdoor risk management systems, incident reporting frameworks, and adventure safety governance. She has worked closely with outdoor organizations, government bodies, and operators in developing structured risk management practices and learning-based incident reporting systems. Today, she joins us virtually to speak on incident reporting and risk management systems, lessons from Australia and relevance for India. Dr. Clare, thank you for joining us virtually today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Clare.
Thank you. I just want to check that you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Fantastic. I can see some some familiar faces in the crowd. So lovely to see Mr. Bagaj. Brilliant to see you again as well. And I'll just share my screen as we go through. Oops, just 1 second. Too many screens. One second till I move all this stuff. Okay, brilliant. I'll just check. I can't see anybody. If somebody could be close to the camera and just let me know, or a thumbs up that you can see the screen okay. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. That's great. Well, look, wonderful to be here with you. I'm sitting in Melbourne, Australia. The accent is not Australian, it's Irish, but it's probably via the US, Wales, Canada, and a number of other places. But I'm lucky enough now to live in Melbourne. I was in India a couple of years ago and absolutely loved your country and really interested in the work that you're doing. And you know, this seminar is just absolutely fantastic. So thank you for the invite. My background is, as you know, as was introduced there, I'm an adventure tourism operator and outdoor educator for many years. Grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, if you remember that period, and I got interested in kayaking, canoeing when I was a young child, and really from there on had a lifelong love of the outdoors. And I guess for me, in many ways, it changed. Just to start off with a bit of a story leading into this, my love of the outdoors changed a lot with this picture. And this was a long time ago. This was the end of the 1990s, and I was working as a young instructor at an environmental education center in upstate New York. And I was young. I thought I knew everything. And at this exact spot, one day, everything changed for me. And unfortunately, and as we've just heard with the previous speakers, when bad things happen, we all hear about it and they can have significant impact. And that's what started for me. I think I was about 22, 23 years old when a teacher who was visiting our program tragically lost her life in a drowning accident. And I can remember really clearly this incident. Even looking at that photo, it's very benign. It's a beautiful environment. Not all incidents and accidents happen and involve raging rivers or flash floods. In fact, many incidents, and as I'll show with some of the data, the majority of incidents don't involve those higher risk activities. In fact, things such as free time or traveling, all those sort of areas outside of perhaps what are seen as more the overtly risky activities, we're seeing significant number of incidents. So fast forward, this incident, the big focus from this incident was on the decisions and actions of the instructors on the ground or the participants. That's what really garnered a lot of the focus after. And then fast forward about 20 odd years to this place. And for those of you who've been in Australia, you'll know that this is a very representative picture of Australia. It's dry, it's dusty. And this was actually just outside, it was in a park near Canberra, in Canberra itself, in the nation's capital. And the difference between these two pictures is quite stark, obviously different countries. But what really stands out for them, this picture I was standing next to a couple of regulators, health and safety regulators, and you can probably see a little tiny tree that was planted. That tree was planted because a young man tragically lost his life on an adventure activity. playing a game of capture the flag, basically hide and seek. And unfortunately, the boys who were playing this activity were bored. There wasn't much supervision, and they picked up a tree or picked up a log, and unfortunately, the log fell and hit one of the young men who was standing under it. The thing that I wanted to share about this story, and it really stands out with what I'm going to present this afternoon, and what we really just heard from around the ISO, is that 20 years apart, there were very different approaches taken to try and understand what contributed to these incidents, what contributed to these, horrible, fatal incidents, and what could we learn from them. 20 years before, it was very much around the decisions and actions of the staff on the ground or the guides. 20 years later, it was the regulators who had commissioned myself and my team to do an investigation or review of this incident. And what they really wanted to understand were what were the range of systemic and organization and cultural factors that contributed or had some form of presence in contributing to this incident, so that we could learn from that and hopefully identify and address these types of factors, not just those factors associated with the individual decisions and actions on the day. And so that leads me to this. When we think about the safety science, and there's a lot of folks who work in this area, it calls safety science or human factors or systems thinking. And what we know is that our understanding of why incidents and accidents have happened has significantly changed over the last sort of 30, 40, 50, 70 years. And you'll notice the picture on the left are these pictures, the famous, the Titanic. And that, what we learn and what we've learned is that significant incidents and catastrophes that happen are often studied, and we're often evolving our understanding of why incidents and accidents occur. So if we think back to 1912, 15th of April, 1912 with the Titanic, long time ago, that, it was really specific there, really focused on the equipment. She was too heavy. She couldn't get through the icebergs. And our understanding has really, we started to sort of, many years ago, really think about equipment failures as that sort of contributing. That was what led to the incident. And then we sort of move into the 70s and 80s, again, seeing more and more major catastrophes such as Chernobyl or Zeebrugge or Bhopal, for example, Long Island, so plane crashes, train crashes, significant sort of 3 Mile Island nuclear reactors. And our understanding of why these incidents and accidents happen has evolved to the extent where then we started thinking about the human, and they talked about the naughty humans or these unsafe acts or error. That's where we started to hear the term human error come into the vocabulary of why incidents and accidents happen. But interestingly, that really was quite limiting. As more incidents had happened, as more sort of awareness was increased around why these types of incidents could happen, it wasn't just as easy to and it wasn't sufficient any longer to say, you know what, it was just that human doing a bad thing. We started in the safety science world to get more interested in what are these other, what influences the decisions and actions of humans. Things such as fatigue, such as financial pressures, cultural pressures, ability to speak up, rostering, staffing pressures. Those things started to come into our understanding of potentially featuring and playing a role in major incidents. So that's now where we start seeing things such as systems level factors, cultural factors. And what's fascinating about it is that for many of us who work in practice, there's still quite a limiting understanding or a limited focus following incidents or near misses as to why they're happening. We still focus quite largely, and that's what we did here in Australia, quite largely on, that must be that human, the guide who made a bad decision, and we'll use the blame, shame, and retrain approach. But interestingly, research has really moved in the safety science world, has moved quite far ahead. And again, as we know, as researchers, there's quite a lag between practice, between research and then practice catching up. And that's really what today's about, is really trying to, sharing a case study here from Australia around how we've tried to bridge that gap a little bit in terms of our understanding of incidents and how we can then, what we can do with that understanding to better prevent them. So we've got an evolution, and really in this context, then this area of systems thinking, and we've just heard a comment about it earlier. Systems thinking is now in the occupational health and safety world, and in risk and safety world is the most common, most frequently and current explanation of contemporary explanation of why incidents and accidents happen. And so it's underpinned by three main key, features or principles. The first one is around this idea that safety or risk is impacted by decisions and actions of everyone involved in the adventure tourism sector, for example, or program, or organization, not just those folks at the front line. Secondly, incidents and near misses, they're always caused by multiple interacting factors. There's not just a single or poor action or decision that actually causes the incident. Of course, there's going to be a triggering event. Of course, there's going to be a bad storm or a decision to proceed with, crossing the glacier or deciding to cross the river. But those decisions and actions are always influenced by other factors further upstream, whether that's training, whether that's pressures, whether that's time pressure, whether that's staffing constraints, for example, whether that's, these rich tourists from overseas have paid a lot of money and they expect to be able to see that wonderful highlight of India. And then third, the things that we do about it, the things that we do to prevent or to reduce the likelihood of incidents reoccurring, they should look at the wider program design. They should look at the holistic aspect of the work and the organization, not just those single actions. So for example, we used to see quite a lot here in Australia, if there'd been an incident, the instructor involved in the incident, they would basically be pushed aside or fired or said, see you later. And the challenge with that is that all those other factors that influence their decisions and actions on the day are actually still there. The only thing that's changed is that person's gone. So we've had many incidents and many case studies where we've seen that all these other factors are at play, and purely moving the staff or moving that individual person is unlikely to be that effective in preventing future incidents. So systems thinking sort of represents the most contemporary explanation of how to enhance safety performance. And I would completely agree with the previous speaker. Safety and quality and outcomes go hand in hand. They're not separate. They shouldn't be treated separately. And so here's a framework to show that. This Rasmussen is probably, this framework is the most used framework to explain this that we're seeing now in terms of work health and safety and in risk management. And really what I tried to do here is that this framework, it's as theoretical as we get, basically says that within any organization, there are multiple people and things, and organizations are made up of multiple tools, hierarchies, people sitting at all levels of the work system. And in that, there are decisions and actions made, social norms, cultural norms, that within this overall organization or work system that influence and shape system behavior and performance. And so if we think about yourselves at the work level, these are the things, the infrastructure, the equipment, it might be your gear. We just heard about the importance of good equipment, might be the tools that you have. Then we get into the staffing level. So for example, your guides, maybe other vendors, maybe other companies sharing the areas that you're working in, your clients. We're getting into the management of the organizations involved, perhaps leaders, policies and procedures, your documentation. So we're starting to see now that there are lots of people and things and different actors within a whole work system and within an organization. We get up to that leadership level. You might have your directors, your third parties, perhaps. You might have parks and land access. There would be lots. These are just some examples. But interestingly, that's the point at which the internal organization stops. But if we keep going, we know that, for example, there are other actors at play that influence what goes on within organizations. And so we've just heard from some today, the Ministry of Tourism, the association, ISO, which we just heard about, for example. We might be international bodies. So there would be lots and lots. And then we've got laws and legislation that govern your states, govern, performance, or govern decisions and actions that have to be taken within. So here in Australia, we've got really quite significant work health and safety laws and legislation. So organizations have to work within that, and that has to be part of what they do. So you'll see here that basically the key here with this framework is that decisions and actions at all these levels influence and shape overall safety performance and quality performance, client outcomes, for example, client satisfaction. So it would be incorrect, I guess, and it would be probably not that helpful to solely focus down here at the guide level. It's saying that actually to enhance safety performance, we have to understand that all these factors and actors interact with each other to shape outcomes that we're looking for. So that's as theoretical as we get. And what I want to try and do now is really just highlight two features of this approach, this so-called systems thinking approach, that has really direct relevance, and then share a case study around incident reporting. And so the first one is this one. You may have come across this before in your work. I find this one as someone who's worked in this area for many years and who's received calls at all hours of the night around incidents to be really important. It's this notion of local rationality. What that basically says is that at any given point in time, we do things that make perfect sense to us. For example, none of us go to work this morning, or none of our staff or our guides go to work to do, this is the day I'm going to stuff it all up. Like, it doesn't happen. So decisions make perfect sense. I'm a little embarrassed to say it right now, but I used to receive phone calls about an incident happening, and I used to think I was the risk manager of a large organization, and I used to think, what were they thinking? How could they have made this decision? And really, it's very unhelpful. It forces us to go down and in, to look at that individual's level only, rather than the question, why did it make sense for the person to do, say, feel, or think that? So forcing me as a leader, as a manager, to look up and out. What were the things? Why did it make sense to that person? Because at the time, it made perfect sense. And I think as a leader, as a risk manager, this has been a game changer. As opposed to saying, what were they thinking? Asking the question, why did it make sense? Because at the time, it really did. No one goes to work. 99.9% of us don't plan to have things go wrong. Don't think things will go wrong. Don't make them go wrong on purpose. And then the second principle is this one. And I think this is a really big one. And it was sort of tied into a bit earlier in the earlier conversation. This idea that fixing broken components won't solve your problem or won't address an issue or a potential foreseeable risks that you're as part of your risk profile. And I want to show you a bit of data on this and why I suppose I believe this. We know that for adventure tourism programs, for outdoor programs, risks, there are multiple risks at multiple stages of the program, or potential. And I'm an optimist. I think there's multiple opportunities to get your design, your planning, your preparation right, and really well done, so that when the trip or when the program happens, it's much more likely to be successful. So I'll just get your brains ready. You've had a long day, but here's a bunch of boxes. Don't worry about what's in the boxes. What I want to do is just briefly explain. This is a study that we did with 100 100 heads of outdoor education. So basically, like perhaps some of you in the room, folks that are running large programs, are designing, planning, are responsible for organizing and delivering these big programs involving lots of young people in remote environments all across Australia. And so what we asked them to do is we said, will you please tell us how you plan a program, how you plan to take, whether it's this was an example of a 5-day rafting program down a remote river. And so what you'll see is each of these boxes represents tasks. So for example, to ensure they have the right insurance, we heard that mentioned earlier, to actually select the activities that they were going to do, the location that they were going to do, in the planning, to get parent consent or informed consent. They were going to get information around any pre-existing injuries or illnesses. They were going to brief their staff. They were going to make a decision, for example, are they going to subcontract and outsource, or do they have the relevant skills and knowledge and capabilities to run the trip internally within their school? There are 55 tasks that they go through, so quite significant, obviously. It's not until task 44, what we learned, 44 out of 55, that the child or the student or the client or the tourist, in your case, actually puts their foot in the raft. So it's not until almost at the end that the trip starts. The takeaway there, and it's again very highlighted to this idea of a safety management system, is that there are all these foreseeable areas of upstream risk to get right, or perhaps to get wrong if our systems are not as effective as they should be. Very, very powerful, and hopefully you can see that, a very powerful sort of focus on we have to look further upstream than just solely the point at which we put our foot in the boat. Most of our risk assessment approaches, most of our documentation approaches start at the point where we put our foot in the boat. But as we can see, If we get our planning, if we get our design right, we're much more likely to identify and to manage those risks at the point of which they occur. So how does that lead us to this case study in Australia? It's quite significant because this case study that I want to share with you around the Uploads project is underpinned by the systems thinking approach and by those key principles. The reason I put a photo of a kitchen table, a round table, is because in Australia back in 2010, we were having quite a lot of incidents. We're having a number of incidents within the led outdoor activity sector. What I mean by that is basically programs where there was a direct duty of care led outdoors. So basically professionals, whether it's schools, whether it's adults, it could be the army, for example. So quite a large sector. But we were still seeing accidents and injuries continuing to occur. Our approach up until then had largely been, and I'm probably being overly critical, but I think it's fair, is it was very much this blame, shame, retrain. Like it was very much, let's just move this person, the person who's been involved or the people involved, let's just move them aside or let's just retrain them and we'll be good. That was not working. We weren't seeing a decrease in incidents. Many of us who all came together from different, like you're doing today, from different organizations around Australia, sat around a table and said, what we're doing doesn't seem to be working. So, and then the interventions, the things that we tried to do to improve it, didn't seem to be having a big impact. So we didn't have much. We literally had a problem, a shared problem, and that was it. And we had a desire to improve things. So what we did is we got in touch with the academics. And we basically contacted, at this point, Monash University Accident Research Centre, later became the University of the Sunshine Coast. And we said these folks were really deeply involved in how to optimize human performance when you've got lots of complexity, lots of moving parts, lots of moving people and things, exactly what we just referred to. And so we basically had them do an initial study and give us some recommendations as a sector. That the main recommendations were is that we needed a led outdoor activity, we needed an accident and incident database that was underpinned by a more contemporary thinking approach to why incidents happen and how we can prevent them. So what we had up until then was really probably an Excel spreadsheet with a number of incidents, but really our focus was primarily on what happened that day of the incident, not what were the wider contributing, how can we get a much better understanding of what are the things that influence these incidents. So that's what we did. We got some funding. We put our hats on together, the sector and the academics, and we got some funding and we developed Uploads. And Uploads basically is an national incident data set. It's been going, we had some prototypes, but it's been going since 2014. And so we're up to now over 20,000 incidents. It's the largest led outdoor activity incident database in the world, and it's able to capture data, as you can see there, on a range of types of incidents that you would all know very well in your work. We've over 130 odd organizations, about 1,100 registered users, and it covers across Australia. It's an opt-in system and it's free. There's an app, and so the app was developed, I think, around 2018, and so that makes it much quicker for staff in organizations to be able to capture and to be able to report their data. The key bit here is that the upload system is underpinned by this idea that there are factors across all levels. So that basically means, or there may be factors in an incident across all levels and how they interact with each other. So that basically means that within organizations, staff who report incidents, you obviously would have your field level, they would be using the app to report, but you also have management and leadership level who are also entering data surrounding the incident. So it's giving a much more sort of holistic perspective for trying to deeply understand these incidents. Importantly, obviously, data is de-identified. That was a big part of this, was obviously privacy concerns. And then probably the key bit that's important here in terms of a selling feature for getting organizations to come on board is that they can interrogate and benchmark their own data. So for example, if I run a sea kayaking organization and I know what my incident data is, I want to know how I'm going against the sector. I want to be able to benchmark against other organizations who also do sea kayaking. So I can literally go in, I can do by venue, by region, by activity type, and I can get a good understanding of sort of how am I going, how am I traveling? And that's been a big part of this project. So to sort of sum up, what have we learned? We have 20,000 incidents over 10 years. we've just got a bunch of new funding to really take the tool and go to the next level and include now risk assessment, prospective risk assessment, which is a whole other story. But here's what we've learned. We've learned by far, and now we have the data to prove it. And I heard, I think a couple of speakers ago, you know, we're the same here. When you have an incident, oftentimes my job, I get contacted either by media, I get contacted by regulators to speak about incidents that happen and, oh, this is terrible for the sector. We know that when incidents happen, they can generate a lot of fear and negativity. And so to have data to show, literally to demonstrate that the vast majority of incidents are minor and incredibly minor. We also have ability to compare. So we can compare to, for example, sport. In our case, cricket, netball, for example, Australian rules football, that led outdoor activities have a much, much lower incident and injury rate than these organized sports, which is very important for schools. We also know that the sector is quite effective at the higher risk activity management. So that's a real plus and a real benefit. Most of the injuries that we're actually seeing are these areas. Again, most of this is dealing with dependent participants. So free time, walking, running, camping, that's where we're seeing a lot of incidents. That's where we're seeing the majority of incidents. Not, for example, major catastrophes on high ropes courses or flash floods. Obviously, we know that the catastrophic impact of those can be significant, but interestingly, we think we're really confident that those are being really well managed. We also can tell and confirm and prove that there are multiple factors spanning multiple actors. So, you know, through the data itself, it's showing that we have to be more comfortable to look up and out versus just down and in at the triggering events or the triggering actions of individuals, and look more holistically. So overall, a lot more to it than, you know, just participant error. And then really to bring us sort of towards the end, this is a big one, and this is one as a researcher now and who's heavily involved in this work. You know, we're seeing that the patterns to the minor incidents are pretty similar to the big ones. So in many ways, we're getting free lessons. My colleague Paul Salmon talks about this a lot. You know, really, it highlights the importance and the benefits of deeply, you know, spending time really trying to, you know, understand the contributing factors, not just the outcome, but what were the factors that contributed to these incidents. The areas that keep coming up, where organizations and where the data is showing improvements are needed, are, you know, you can see there, communications, probably things that are very similar to you and your work. Risk assessment, interaction between all the different players involved, the clients, maybe third-party vendors, whoever you might work with. How about folks who come with pre-existing injuries? Again, and how do we manage those? How do we find out about those? And how do we alter, if we need to, our program design? So those are the areas that are sort of, you know, highlighting red flags that we need to do some work on. And as you can see, those are really important design factors. And then, you know, we're really proud of this, that, you know, a peer-reviewed evaluation has demonstrated that upload users, so folks who've been using it, organizations who've been using it for a while, demonstrated a reduction in their incidents through using the tool. Here's the big 8. You know, here's the sort of takeaway out of 20,000 incidents. These are the sort of factors that come up regularly. So across incident types. And you can see there in your adventure tourism world, you know, there would be a lot of similarities. You know, parent communications, you're really thinking their client comms. We know that, you know, is there a match between client expectations and what we can deliver? Have we really clearly sold? How are we able to deliver what we've sold? Does our marketing materials align with what actually happens on the ground? Program design, you know, so again, is that consistent? Does the program design meet the needs of the participants or clients involved? So this is where, if people, you know, if a question was asked, where, you know, what should I focus on? This was what we would focus. These are the big 8, the recurring, that keep coming up over those 20,000. So really sort of useful data. And so then, you know, here I had to think about sort of, you know, if in your journey and your safety framework and the wonderful work that's happening in India, I think I'd probably take away, you know, in 2010, 2009, when we started this and sat around a kitchen table, I think the takeaways here were, for us, getting early adopters, getting folks who were really happy to sit around and go, you know, let's give this a go. Let's try something different. Let's look beyond sort of ourselves or, you know, what happened that day, and let's see what we can look at holistically, organizationally, but also sector-wide. And you know, you're doing that as we speak around the wonderful work you're doing around the safety frameworks. So early adopters were really important from all parts of the sector. I think there was a real fear of being exposed. So that took a long time. You know, we had to really work through that privacy, you know, making sure data storage, making sure that competitors wouldn't see people's data, organizations' data. That took a long time and a lot to work through. It was a good lesson. I think also we couldn't just leave it to the academics. We had a partnership with the academics, but actually the sector really had to stand up and take accountability and responsibility for the training and the involvement in terms of how to analyze incidents using a much more holistic approach. And I think you've got a wonderful in your association, you know, that's what you're doing as we speak. So I think that was really critical and a really big outcome in terms of our learning. And then I think people will do and give discretionary effort if they get something back. So that was a real, again, learning around this was that we share now quarterly. There are literally quarterly infographics that go out around the data. We've just done one recently on concussion and head injuries, which has become a real hot topic here in Australia. So we were able to go through all the data and just really analyze that one area. We had one recent, you know, we've had ones recently around heat-related illnesses, because again, living in Australia, that's a major issue. We've had some around cold-related in wintertime. We're able to look specifically by activity itself. We're able to look by region or venue. So really communicating to the sector on a regular basis kept them involved. And that's important because people will not, and there's a lot of data around this and research, people will stop reporting if they don't feel if it's any benefit, if they don't hear anything back. And that's what we see in organizations a lot, especially those that have Excel spreadsheets or very, very limited incident reporting. Unless it's something's being done with it, people don't have the time or inclination to continue. And I think finally, you know, many of us have a lot more gray hair than what we did back then, but it's well worth it. It's a process. It takes time. It's a very sometimes counterintuitive way because when incidents happen, people tend to get defensive or they tend to try and make it go away. And if it goes away, if we just focus on that, then we can make it all go away. But I think if we really want to truly enhance safety in our sector, if we want to try and provide our clients with a better, and our staff with a better experience and know that they'll be supported if they speak up, we also know that we're getting folks, guides speaking up a lot more because they know they're not going to be crucified. They're not going to be blamed, that they're able to talk about the things that concern them. That's really, that's a big takeaway. So I know you've had a big day, so I'm very happy to take questions, comments. I put in there a couple of times the website for uploads. Very happy to get in touch outside of the session today, but thank you again for the time. It's much appreciated.
You have a question?
Yeah, just had a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
So we are very interested about that 20,000 cases you have got. Is it possible in some fashion to share with us the process you follow? What is it, like a app or is it like a website where people upload it? What is the way that is done? Because we are right now at the stage where we are going to start putting all our cases together. So it may help us to kind of move in a certain direction.
Yeah, definitely. It's I can probably talk more offline because there's quite a lot to it. But
Yes.
basically, in short, when we first started in 2010, it was before, you know, it seems like a long time ago now. We had no apps. That first app came in 2018. Even then, it was pretty clunky. That was a big learning. Was unless users are able to report easily and quickly, they won't report. They won't keep it up. And so that's the big takeaway for me. So now there is an app, this third iteration of the project, we're just kicking off this year. And there's a significant investment going into upgrading the app. And that's how it's done. It's basically on an app, upload your incident. That goes into a national incident database, which then becomes de-identified. All that is held within the university because that's seen as a neutral agency. So that's something that I think is worth considering how you would do that in India. How do you make sure that people feel comfortable sharing their data and it's one thing we heard a lot, oh, what if it's held against me if something happens? So there's a lot of that to sort of navigate through, but very willing to chat about it outside of this.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you so much, Dr. Clare. We
Very
learned
welcome.
from you that incident reporting is not about blame, but about learning, improving, and preventing future mistakes. Thank you so much for sparing your time for us.
Pleasure. Thank you, everybody.